It seems impossible that there could be such a thing as a perfect novel. And yet, if you go online, if you go on YouTube, if you go on Reddit, if you go anywhere where people discuss books and literature and novels, there is one standout exception. One book that people point to and say, actually, this might be the perfect novel. And that is Stoner by John Williams. So much so that I almost wonder if John Williams, the author, is becoming more famous than John Williams, the composer. Maybe not in the mind of the average person if you were to stop them on the streets, but definitely in certain pockets of the internet, John Williams, the author, is the first thing people think of when they think of the name John Williams. And it's not just Stoner that people talk about when they talk about John Williams. They also talk about uh, the novel he wrote before that, a Western called Butcher's Crossing, which is about uh, kind of like a Massachusetts city boy who goes to Kansas because he wants to experience the West, and he meets up with a gang of hunters, scavengers, on a buffalo hunt, and things just kind of fall apart from there. It's That's a very brutal book, very intimate with viscera. That book is. Stoner has a much more low key premise. It is just about a man who becomes a professor of English at Boston University, and kind of just leads a mediocre, ordinary, kind of sad life. It doesn't sound like that would be the premise of a perfect novel, but sometimes when a book lacks in a premise, it can make up for an execution, and that book, Stoner will execute. It'll execute you. It'll have a profound effect. I read that book a couple of years ago. I want to read it at least once for every decade of my life. I'm in my 20s. I want to read that book in my 30s. I want to read that book in my 40s and in my 50s and so on. I want to keep reading that book because it's one of those novels where you can keep coming back to it and you get something new. There was one other novel uh, John Williams wrote that received some recognition. It's definitely the one that received the most recognition in his lifetime, and that is Augustus. That is an epistolary novel, so everything is all the events that are being described by characters within the narrative. Everything's told from like journal or diaries and missives and history from people who witnessed the event, um, that sort of thing. It's kind of like Dracula, except instead of being about a vampire, it's about Gaius Octavius, who would later become Augustus Caesar. There is one novel that John Williams wrote that receives almost no attention. Is the first novel that he wrote, or at least it's the first novel that he got published. And that novel is Nothing But the Night. I have it here, published by NYRB, as are all of his novels. It is interesting. I did not know what to expect when I purchased this book and read it. I I didn't know if this would be a sort of undiscovered masterpiece, um, like a hidden gem. It's like, oh, no one talked about this novel. Apparently, the author himself has distanced himself or had distanced himself when he was still alive from this novel. Uh, is there some hidden genius here, or is this or not? Um, well, from having read the book last year and having gone through it a little bit uh, before recording, I can say that it is not. It is not a diamond in the rough. It is not a hidden gem. It is um, quite surprisingly really bad. um, Now, it actually, the most interesting thing about this physical book here is not so much the actual novel itself, which is well, I'll get into it. But it's actually an interview with Nancy Gardner Williams that's at the end of this book. As you might have guessed from her surname, she was the wife and then widow of John Williams. John Williams passed away in the 1990s. And Nancy had given an interview about him and about his work and about his life and about how, or who he was as a person, outside of being an author and a professor of literature. That is probably the best part about the actual physical book. Uh, and there is something about that interview which explains a lot about the novel's construction. And by construction, I mean like the circumstances which John Williams found himself when he wrote that novel. Um, because uh, as you might expect, um, if you read it, this novel, which is very short and um, very disorganized and kind of pointless. Um, the novel doesn't really go anywhere. It kind of just starts and then kind of meanders and then just kind of fizzles out at the end, which is very atypical of Williams's work. I've read all four of his novels, and he has a very strong attention to plot and uh, to events unfolding and to character especially. I don't know of another author who writes characters that feel like real life people better than Williams. Williams's characters most of the time feel not like characters in the book, even though that's what they literally are. They feel like people that you have met before or currently know or it seems like you could meet these characters in the future. Not so much with Nothing But the Night. And it's not just because characters have silly first names like Hollis and Stafford. No, more so these characters I feel very paper thin. Uh, like they were constructed very quickly to fit a scene um, rather than to work as part of a larger narrative. And that made sense when you get to the interview part at the end of the book, the interview with Nancy Williams, and you learn that John Williams wrote this book in World War II when he was a soldier and when he had found himself in a forest. I don't remember if he had been shot down or the exact circumstances, but he had found himself in a forest, and his only main job was to collect dog tags off fallen soldiers, and so that way their families would know what had happened to them. They would know um, that they had passed away. And it was while doing this, while waiting for rescue or for next assignment, that he had a lot of time to kill, and he didn't really have any other way to entertain himself other than to write. So that's what he did. He wrote an entire novel in this brief span of time where um, he, he found himself isolated and with nothing to entertain him. So he literally wrote this whole novel just to kill time. And knowing that about the book, uh, that explains a lot about the book. Honestly, it feels like something that someone wrote as like a first draft, just to have something to do. It it doesn't really have much of a plot. The characters they kind of allude to having depth, but they don't really have much depth. Um, Arthur Maxley, who is the main character of the novel, he has kind of a tragic past, which kind of informs his present mental state, but it seems kind of very loose, like the connection between what had happened in his childhood to how that makes him act now as an adult. It's a very tenuous thing. When you get there's kind of like a big reveal at the end of the novel, which goes into like why Arthur Matzley is the way he is, and it doesn't really the two things just don't connect. I guess I don't really want to spoil it too much. I If you are a John Williams completionist, you want to read all of his novels because you really like Stoner, you really like Butcher's Crossing, or you really like Augustus, then uh, reading this novel you can say after you read this novel that, hey, I've read all the stuff he ever wrote. NYRB also sells a collection of Renaissance poetry that that John Williams had curated. I don't know if any text in that book was written by John Williams. I don't know if he introduced the poems or if he just curated the selection. I am curious to check out that book just so I can say I read um, everything that John Williams was involved in. I can certainly say I've read all four of his novels, including the one that no one talks about, which is Nothing But the Night. Um, but I guess I still have yet to read the that that collection of Renaissance poetry. But besides saying that you've read all of his novels, there really isn't much of a point to reading this book. If you're just looking for uh, uh, a psychological noir, which is very funnily what the description of this book says. That is like, read the back of the book. It says like this is a brooding psychological noir. Um, I kind of laugh at that description because I guess that maybe that's what it was going for. I don't know if it really succeeds in the execution, but I guess that was sort of maybe the intent. Um, Really, what the book literally is something that the author wrote because he had nothing else to do. He literally had nothing else to do, so he wrote this novel. The weird thing, though, is that he did get it published. Before it was published by NYRB in the 21st century, it had previously been, or John Williams had, once he got back from the war, he had sold this book to a publisher. I don't know which one, but it was a small publisher. He got this published. I don't know why, frankly. The actual manuscript, I'm guessing that NYRB just took the manuscript as is and then published it. It actually has like some typos and like some punctuation errors where like the punctuation's in the wrong spot, which is weird. It's not something that's typical of NYRB books. I read quite a few. I'm a big fan of that publisher. It's actually probably my favorite American publisher. Um, and I have at least a dozen books from that publisher. It's the first time I've read one of their books where there's like so many like typos and stuff. I'm gonna guess that they just took the manuscript and then just put it in as is. Uh, and it made sense, like, right, if you're writing, if you're in, if you're a downed soldier and you just need to kill time, you're just writing whatever, and you just have a manuscript there. I'm gonna guess it's gonna have some errors, but it's weird that like he would then go on to publish it when it has problems, not just the typographical errors, but also errors in terms of like the plot not having a point to it. It's just very odd. It's just a very odd book. I would say it's actually more of like a curiosity than anything else. But yeah, I was the, the curiosity of it is what drew me to it. Like I wanted to read this book from an author I really enjoy that no one talks about, to see if it was any good. And unfortunately, it's not very good. It's not a good novel, unlike his other three novels, which I would say are very good, especially Stoner, which is not only his best work, but one of the best novels I've ever read. Maybe not the absolute best. Maybe I'd probably put Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov or 2666 by Roberto Bolaño above Stoner, but Stoner still would probably be in the top 10 novels I've ever read. It is it is really good. In terms of characters, I don't think I've read another novel that had more realistic and compelling characters that felt like real life people. I definitely felt that with Stoner. Um, yeah, I would not recommend Nothing But the Night unless you just want to read everything that Williams ever wrote. If you want to read everything that Williams ever wrote, then this novel is obviously something you have to read. Otherwise, I would skip it. But it was reading this novel. and revisiting it so I could record this, it was an interesting experience, and I'm at least thankful that NYRB decided to publish it because it is interesting and nothing else. But yeah, that's all I have to say about it.